Hello! Today we're going to learn the how, when, and why to make a pivot table. One of the common things that people say when they're talking about pivot tables is that they're hard or they're complicated and they're just, tedious. But they're wrong. It's actually really easy and forgiving, but only if you know what you're doing. I know that sounds weird. I just said it's easy and forgiving. And then all of a sudden I say only if you know what you're doing. I'm not talking about the pivot table. I'm talking about the data you're manipulating. What do you want to get from the data? How do you want to see it? That's where the problem comes from or the difficulties arise, right? Thankfully, pivot tables are very forgiving and you can literally do trial and error just to get what you want from a pivot table. And we're going to show you an example of how to do that with a data set that I already pre-planned. As you can see here, we have a couple of columns and rows, very basic made up data. There's a company here, build column, fee in dollars, contract year of bill, duration of contract or year, and then product type. Full disclosure, I haven't seen this data set, so I'm literally not prepared to come up with a huge analysis of this data set. But from this data set alone, I can make a pivot table because I can eyeball what things I might find interesting. And that's really what a pivot table is, right? You want to see the relationship between each of these rows or columns and figure out what you can say about the data because data will tell you a story. The first step in making a pivot table is having a data set that's arranged in this manner. You need titles, you need a title for each column, and you need rows with data inside. So you can see it's all filled up. It also has to be uniform. If it's all numbers, it has to be all numbers. If it's all dollars, it has to be all dollars. If it's yeses or nos, it'll just make it easier for you. We're going to go through the how. There's a couple ways to do this. The first way is to go and highlight your data set from the upper left, A1 in this case, all the way down to G40. And for the people who don't know what I'm talking about, this is the 40 and this is the G. So we in Excel terms or spreadsheet terms, we always talk about it in letter first and then the number after. Okay, so G40. So I'm going to highlight everything. I'm going to do insert and I'm going to click pivot table. You can also do a pivot table from here. Just go straight to insert and pivot table and then you just select from table or range. There's also the from external data source, but we're not going to do that right now. It's basically linking from a different Excel sheet or a different website or what have you. So you can do that as well. So we're going to do from table or range. And I already selected it a while ago, so you can change it here if you don't have it already or you didn't highlight it. You can choose to make a new worksheet, which is like what people usually do, or you can put it in the existing worksheet. In this case, if it's the existing worksheet, make sure to select a cell. It doesn't have to be the whole table, just select a cell where it starts. All right, so that's it. So I'm going to do a new worksheet for this one. There's another tab here or a checkbox that I'm ignoring, but we're going to keep ignoring that. It's just choosing whether you want to analyze multiple tables and adding this data to the data model. We don't need to do that for this basic video. So I'm going to click OK. And now you can see the beauty of pivot tables. You'll see a pivot table chart on the left side and all of the checkboxes, company, build, fee, and rows. If you're, pretty observant, you'll see that these are the column names. So if you go back to your data set, sheet 1, these are the title of your columns or the column headers. That's why you always have to have a name in it so that you can select it as a data set. So these are called characteristics. I think they call it something different, but I call it characteristics. These are factors where you can get your data from and manipulate your pivot table. Pivot table is called a pivot table. It's a matrix and you can pivot little characteristics. Again, this is not the official story of why they're called that way. This is my interpretation and it makes it easier for me to understand. So this is just me telling you what is, what makes sense. And basically, you're trying to put the characteristics on a table. If it's a physical table, you're going to put the ingredients of different things, and then you're going to come up with something. The pivot table on the left side, this is actually the culmination of the dish or the food that you've mixed together and cooked, right? And the ingredients are right here. 4 boxes that you see here, these are where you can drop them in and this is what will form your data set. So let's try to do something random. Let's do company in a column. All of the things here under column and put a grand total. So that's just basically a label, right? So if you do that, I can put the companies over this way, or I can do the same thing but in a row label. That's a little cleaner because I can see it that way. Whatever, however you want your data to be presented. Remember, it doesn't matter. Like columns or rows, it doesn't matter. What matters most is how you want it to look like. And if you make a mistake, you can easily like drop it here back and forth like that. So I'm just literally dragging it and dropping it like this. That's it. And then once you get that figured out, these two columns and rows are pretty much the same thing. What if I add another one? Another label, right? So for example, I want the contract here, right? So if I add the contract here on the same row or the same data set, it will give me, or it will break down the companies by row or the subtype. So basically, it's gonna be on the same level hierarchy. Let's see what that looks like. It's better if you see what that looks like. So you'll see underneath each of these rows, you'll see the years that they have available, right? That is all well and good if you're trying to do something specific, but if you only have these two things, I would suggest that you put it in another data set. If your existing data set is already in rows, put it in the columns. So I'm gonna put it on columns, or vice versa. You can do the other way around, right? If you just want to see the years and then the companies. So I'm gonna switch it back. Now you have a table, right? So it's still blank because why? Because we don't know yet like the data that you're trying to count. You know, this is where the values come in. There are also a couple of ways you can manipulate the columns and rows, but it's not as complicated as values, in my opinion. So, for example, we're talking about value. So, if you try to do the company here as a value, it will just give you a count of the companies for that year. How many companies are there in 2016, 17, 18, and 19? And then if I drop it down and manipulate this even further, I'm going to click value field settings on it, and then I can do a sum. But that doesn't make sense because that's just basically the companies, and it's a text, so it's not gonna do anything. It's just gonna be a zero right there. So I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna do count instead, right? And same thing with average, max, min, product, right? These are all numbers, and unfortunately, the only thing that makes sense without going into discrete and non-discrete data, we're not gonna talk about that. You can only count it. Now, if I wanted to actually see, for example, how much money is attached to Accounting Inc. in 2016 or 17 or whatever year they made money. If you go back to your data set, and this is where it's forgiving, you will have a chance to figure out like what you want to come up with. And in this case, we want to see fees and dollars, right? So we want to see the dollar signs over here. So we just want to do that. So I'm going to put the fees in dollars. I'm going to literally just drag drop it over here. Excel is usually smart enough to figure out if you want the count or the sum. Since it's a number, it's going to be a sum. So if I do it there, it's going to be automatically sum. And then it's kind of like weird for me. So I'm going to just do a quick format. I'm going to do general and then click currency. So now you can see it as a currency in dollars. Okay. So now you'll be able to figure out, all right, so in 2018, these companies made money or provided some fees, etc. And that's it. Give you a snippet of when and why. When to make a pivot table is when you want to present something and you're given a lot of data sets and or columns and rows and stuff. You basically want to be able to consolidate that data into like something you can digest. Why to make a pivot table? Why to make a pivot table is the same as kind of when to make it and how to make it. Why basically is because it's easier. It's easier than going through all of this and mapping out and identifying every single thing here and trying to figure out in the same. If you try to do the same thing that we just did on a pivot table, identify what companies made money in 2016, you literally have to type 2016 here, and then you're gonna have to manually type Great Tech. Pivot tables are very dynamic and very forgiving, like I mentioned. So thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and comment below what you want to see or find out next on pivot tables or just Excel in general. Thank you. Bye.